The crystal chandelier at Beastro Lauron shimmered above us, casting graceful shadows across the table, but no amount of soft lighting could polish the tension humming beneath the surface. I sat quietly in my vintage blazer and paint-streaked jeans, the only one in the room not dressed to impress, while they toasted Mom's 55th birthday with overpriced wine and performative smiles. I watched them slice into my life like it was the main course. I'm Natalie Morrison, or, as my family liked to say with a rehearsed chuckle, our daughter who's still figuring things out. At 31, I was the family misfit, the one who chose art over spreadsheets, a sunlit warehouse loft over a gated suburban community, and a van splattered in pigment over a sleek black Mercedes, the black sheep who molded sculptures they couldn't define, and wouldn't try to understand. So, Natalie, my sister-in-law Jessica said, voice honeyed and insincere as she delicately pierced her salmon. Are you still doing that little pottery thing? Sculpture, I replied, gently but firmly, raising my water glass. I avoided the wine, judging by their glances. It had already been decided I couldn't afford it. Derek, my older brother and the family's crown jewel, leaned back with the smugness only success and applause could buy. His accounting firm was thriving, and he never let us forget. Still playing with crayons? He said with a booming laugh, loud enough to turn nearby heads. Come on, Nat, time to grow up. Mom offered a sympathetic smile, though her eyes betrayed a quiet disappointment. Sweetheart, we support your hobby, but wouldn't it be nice to have some real stability? Derek knows firms that would hire you in a second. It's not a hobby, Mom, I said, measured. It's my career. Dad scoffed, adjusting his platinum watch like it made his opinion heavier. Career? Natalie, you're 31. When are you going to stop pretending and join the real world? Jessica chimed in, faux concern laced through her voice. We just worry about you. That warehouse neighborhood, that van, it's not exactly safe or lucrative. Derek chuckled. What did you even make last year? 5 grand? 10? I smiled and stayed silent. They had no clue about the private commissions, the international collectors, the sold-out gallery shows in New York, the upcoming one in London. I'd learned the hard way, sharing success only invited entitlement, not pride. There's still time to pivot, Mom pressed. Hopeful, you were always so good with numbers. Derek's expanding his firm? Finally, I murmured. Derek's jaw tightened. My firm is one of the most respected in the state. We manage portfolios in the millions. I'm sure you do, I said, calm as glass. Dad leaned in, voice going full lecture mode. The Morrison name means something in this city. Your great-grandfather built this legacy on hard work, wise decisions, and results. You could honor that too. I thought of the sculpture I'd just shipped to a collector in Geneva, for more than Derek's firm billed in a quarter. Of the pieces in progress, each worth more than this restaurant's annual wine budget. Of the Chelsea Gallery offering me a solo exhibition. You could still make something of yourself, Jessica said with a smile she thought was kind. It's not too late to start over. Derek glanced at his Rolex, as if the hour confirmed his superiority. Speaking of making something, I just landed Morrison Industries as a client. Biggest deal in our firm's history. Maybe you've heard of them, Nat? Real heavy hitters. I nearly choked on my water. Morrison Industries had commissioned me 6 months ago. They didn't know Derek was my brother, and I hadn't volunteered that fact. I was designing 5 custom sculptures for their new headquarters, each one individually worth more than Derek's yearly salary. Can't say I have, I said, keeping my face neutral. Well, you wouldn't really be in that league, he said, amused. The CEO's Alexander Morrison, total powerhouse. Forbes list, you know, actual success. I nearly smiled. Alexander and I had been exchanging voice notes about art and consciousness for weeks. He didn't just collect my work, he respected it. We were having dinner next Thursday. I'm sure he's very impressed with your services, I offered. Mom leaned in like a matchmaker. Derek, didn't you say Mr. Morrison is single? Maybe he'd like to meet Natalie. A man like that could give her some direction. I almost burst out laughing. He already had, just not the way they imagined. Tea wasn't the first time they'd dismissed me. Mom, Derek said, oozing condescension, A guy like Alexander Morrison doesn't date starving artists. He dates CEOs, women with MBAs and board seats. People with actual accomplishments, Dad added, swirling his wine. Not finger painting. Jessica chimed in with faux concern. Maybe you could take some business classes? Learn to present yourself better? First impressions matter in the professional world. I opened my mouth to respond, but the front door of Beastro Lauron opened with a subtle fanfare, and in walked the last person any of them expected. Alexander Morrison. Billionaire, art patron, one of the most powerful men in tech, and apparently, someone who could command attention without saying a word. The room shifted, waitstaff straightened, diners hushed, and then his gaze landed directly on me. Natalie, he called, his voice rich with warmth and delight, my favorite artist. Every head turned. The maitre d' scrambled to his side, bowing like royalty had entered. My family? Frozen, mid-bite, mid-thought, mid-judgment. Alexander walked straight to our table, kissed my cheek with practiced European grace, and smiled like we'd just stepped out of a private gallery. I was hoping I'd run into you, he said. Are we still on for dinner Thursday? I want to finalize that $50 million commission we discussed. Derek's fork hit his plate with a sharp clang. I stood, casually composed. What a surprise. I was just celebrating Mom's birthday. Alexander turned to them with perfect charm. Family? How wonderful. I'm Alexander Morrison. Natalie's working on a phenomenal sculpture series for our new headquarters. Truly groundbreaking work. Mom blinked rapidly. Dad went sheet white. Jessica looked like her brain had short-circuited. Derek, to his credit, or maybe his survival instinct, shot to his feet. Mr. Morrison. Derek Morrison. We actually spoke yesterday regarding your Q3 reporting. Alexander gave him a passing nod. Ah, yes, the accountant. He turned back to me with interest. By the way, Tokyo's cultural ministry is thrilled. Your work has them completely captivated. Tokyo? Mom whispered. 50 million? Dad muttered. Alexander barely paused. And the Mori Art Museum is featuring her in a major retrospective next spring. I imagine you're incredibly proud. The silence at our table was deafening. Phones began to lift around the restaurant, whispering, recording, strangers realizing they were watching a very public reckoning. Mind if I join for a moment? Alexander asked, already signaling for a chair. I always enjoy meeting the families of legends in the making. Derek looked ready to crawl under the table. Alexander folded into the chair beside me like he belonged there. So, he said, resting his hands on the table, what was it like watching Natalie grow into such an extraordinary artist? You must have some incredible stories. Mom fumbled. She was always creative. Creative, he repeated with amusement. Understatement of the year. Her latest sculpture just sold at Sotheby's for $12 million. The bidding war was fierce. Jessica coughed. Dad blinked. Derek stared at me like I'd shapeshifted. 12 million? Dad gasped. For one piece, Alexander confirmed. But Natalie's work appreciates fast. Smart art is a rare investment, and she's brilliant. He turned to Derek. You're in accounting. Yes, you must appreciate the ROI. Derek nodded stiffly, speechless. Oh, I said, with just enough innocence. I mentioned you were excited about your new client, Morrison Industries. Derek was just telling the table how proud he was. Alexander's smile thinned, just slightly. Indeed. Well, we'll see how that relationship develops. I value accuracy and excellence in my partnerships. Derek's face drained of color. Alexander turned back to me. Natalie, I didn't want to interrupt, but I had to share, your proposal for the Venice Biennale was accepted. You'll be representing the U.S. Pavilion. The table collectively stopped breathing. The Biennale? Dad asked, as if the word were foreign. It's the most prestigious event in the art world, I explained, kind of like the Olympics, except harder to get into. Alexander grinned. Only one artist per country, and Natalie's vision was unmatched. Mom looked like she was trying to remember how to blink. I imagine you'll be flying out to Venice for the opening? Alexander asked. It's a once-in-a-lifetime honor. Mom nodded robotically. Of course, yes, we wouldn't miss it. His phone buzzed. He checked it and sighed. Europe again. Forgive me. He stood and kissed my cheek. Thursday. Lou Bernadine. I'll have my assistant confirm. He shook hands, pausing at Derek. Looking forward to reviewing those quarterly reports. Accuracy is everything in finance. Wouldn't you agree? Derek swallowed hard. And then he was gone, leaving behind an entire restaurant abuzz, and a family stunned into silence. The waiter returned with water refills and the dessert menu, but we all just stared at one another. Mom finally spoke. 50 million? For one commission, I said. There are others. The art world is more lucrative than you think. Jessica blinked. You're famous? In art circles? Yes. My work's in MoMA, the Tate, and LACMA. I've been in art news, the Times, Art Forum. Derek's voice was quiet. Why didn't you tell us? I met his eyes. Because you wouldn't have believed me. You never did. Silence. I tried. I continued. When I had my first solo show, you skipped it for a golf tournament. When I sold my first six-figure piece, Dad called it beginner's luck. When I was reviewed in the Times, Mom warned me not to get a big head over my hobby. No one spoke. The warehouse loft? I added. I own the entire building, worth about $8 million. The van? It's custom-built to safely transport museum-grade sculpture. Cost more than Derek's BMW. Derek winced. I don't live that way because I have to, I said. I live that way because it's intentional. My work isn't flashy, but it's real. And it's mine. Mom reached for my hand. Natalie, we didn't know. Because you never asked. Dad looked down at his untouched dessert. We thought we were being practical. You were being condescending, I said gently. There's a difference. The air around us had shifted. They were seeing me now, clearly, for the first time. And it was too late to rewrite history. Installations. It's a 3-year project, I explained, that will transform Morrison Industries headquarters into a cultural landmark. Mom leaned forward, fishing carefully. And you two are friends, colleagues? He's one of the most insightful collectors I've ever met. We share similar aesthetic philosophies. Derek finally spoke, voice low. Natalie, I owe you an apology. We all do. I studied his face, not for words, but for truth. Was this remorse, or just panic dressed as humility? Do you, Derek? Or are you just realizing that mocking me might now jeopardize your relationship with your biggest client? Color rushed to his cheeks. That's not, I mean. It's exactly what you mean, I said evenly. And that's fine. Business is business. But let's not pretend this is a sudden moral reckoning. This is about optics, about strategy. Mom looked wounded. That's not fair. Natalie, we love you. I know, I said gently, but you've never respected me, and there's a difference. I signaled the waiter for the check. Alexander had said something earlier that echoed in my mind. In this world, first impressions matter, and your family just made theirs. Where are you going? Dad asked as I stood. Back to my studio. I have a $50 million commission to finish. Derek grabbed my sleeve. Natalie, please, can't we start over? I looked at his hand, then at him. You don't want to start over because you've discovered new appreciation for art. You want to start over because you're afraid I'll cost you a client. His silence was an admission. I placed enough cash on the table to cover the entire bill, plus a generous tip. Happy birthday, Mom, I said. Enjoy the rest of your celebration. As I walked toward the exit, I heard the low buzz of hurried whispers, damage control in motion, recalculations happening in real time, strategies shifting now that the family disappointment was worth more than all of them combined. Outside, I slid into my paint-splattered van and let the irony settle. For years, they'd pitied me. Now they feared me. Neither reaction had anything to do with who I truly was. My phone buzzed. Alexander, hope I didn't spark too much drama. Your brother looked like he saw a ghost. Me, only the good kind. Thank you for the timing. Lunch Thursday? Tokyo details? Alexander, wouldn't miss it. And for what it's worth, Derek is competent. Don't fire him on my account. Me, you're too kind. See you Thursday. I drove back to my studio, past glass towers, through the heartbeat of the warehouse district, to the $8 million building I owned outright, the one they thought I rented. Inside, my world waited. 7 monumental sculptures in progress. The Venice Biennale on the horizon. A career carved without their blessing. My phone rang. Derek. I let it go to voicemail. Some bridges aren't rebuilt with apologies made under pressure. True relationships require something rarer, respect that isn't attached to price tags. 3 months later, I stood in the Morrison Industries atrium, watching the final installation take shape. The 7 sculptures formed a fluid narrative, tech, humanity, memory, and future woven into the architecture itself. Critics flew in, collectors circled, the media buzzed. Alexander stood beside me, arms crossed, quietly proud. "Extraordinary," he said. "You've turned a corporate lobby into a place of pilgrimage." I nodded. "The Venice pieces are coming along too. You'll see them soon." "I'll be there," he promised. Then, with a glance, "Your family?" "They've been calling, asking questions, wanting to visit the studio. Jessica even asked to bring the kids." "You're generous to entertain that." "I'm being practical," I said. "I have art to make. Grudges take too much energy." Alexander smiled, spoken like a true artist. As we watched guests move through the space, pausing, reflecting, connecting, I felt the quiet kind of fulfillment no award or bank balance could match. Then my phone buzzed again. "Derek, saw the piece in the Times. Mom wants to invite you to dinner this Sunday. No agenda, just family." I stared at the screen. They were trying, or at least, pretending to. But I'd learned not to measure people by how they respond to your success, but how they treat you before it ever arrives. Still, something in me had shifted too. I typed back. "Sunday works, but I'd choose the restaurant. After all, if we were rebuilding, this time, we'd do it on my terms." Because some victories aren't about revenge or recognition. They're about reclaiming your worth, and choosing whether to open the door when the world finally comes knocking.